I stood in my father's grand study, the heavy scent of cigar smoke still lingering in the air. The dark wooden bookshelves lined the walls, filled with old books he probably never read. My father, Richard Calloway, sat behind his massive oak desk, his sharp gray eyes staring at me without emotion. "I'm leaving everything to Daniel," he said, his voice cold and final. I felt a tightness in my chest, but I didn't let my face show it. I had expected this. "My name is Emily, and I am 28 years old." Daniel, my younger half-brother, smirked from where he stood beside our father. He was 25, 3 years younger than me, and had always been the golden child. He had our father's charm, his looks, and, apparently, his entire fortune. "You don't deserve it, Emily," my father continued, leaning back in his chair. "Daniel has worked harder. He's more responsible. He's the son who truly deserves my legacy." I wanted to laugh. Daniel had never worked a day in his life. While I had spent years trying to earn my father's approval, Daniel had always been handed everything on a silver platter. But I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just gave my father a small, quiet smile. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out of the study. As I stepped into the hallway, I could still hear Daniel's voice behind me. "That's it. No fight. No tears." He chuckled. "Guess you finally know your place." I didn't turn back. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of my father's lawyer. Something told me this wasn't over yet. And I was right. Because what I was about to discover would change everything. I walked out of the mansion, my father's words still echoing in my mind. The night air was cool against my skin, but the fire burning inside me kept me from feeling it. My car was parked at the bottom of the driveway. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, taking a deep breath. I had lost. Or at least, that's what they thought. My phone buzzed. The name on the screen read Mr. Franklin, my father's lawyer. I answered immediately. "Emily, I was hoping you'd call," Mr. Franklin said, his voice calm but urgent. "I need you to come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. There's something you need to see." I frowned. "Is this about the will?" There was a short pause before he spoke again. "Just be here at 9 sharp." That was all he said before the line went dead. I arrived at Mr. Franklin's downtown office right at 9. The waiting room smelled like old paper and coffee. His assistant gave me a polite smile before leading me into his office. Mr. Franklin, a man in his 60s with graying hair, sat behind his desk. He gestured for me to sit. "Emily," he said, folding his hands. "I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you was meant to stay hidden." I leaned forward. "Hidden?" He nodded and reached into his desk, pulling out a thick envelope. He placed it in front of me. "This," he said, tapping the envelope, "is the real will." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean, the real will?" He sighed. "Your father made a last-minute change to his will." But what he didn't know was that there was another document, one he signed years ago, that takes legal priority. I picked up the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside were several old, yellowed papers. My eyes skimmed over the words until I saw it. My breath caught. I read it again. It was dated 5 years ago, long before my father's sudden change of heart. This gives everything to me," I whispered. "Yes," Mr. Franklin said. "And it's still legally binding." I could barely process what I was hearing. My father had disinherited me, but the law said otherwise. Then something else caught my eye. A second document, attached to the will. It was handwritten. A confession letter. With shaking hands, I unfolded the paper and read the words my father had written. And what I saw made my blood run cold. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. The paper was slightly crumpled, as if it had been handled many times before. My father's handwriting was bold but uneven, as though he had written this in a hurry. Emily, if you're reading this, then you found the truth I never had the courage to tell you in person. I have made mistakes. Many of them. And now, I am paying for them. What I did to you was not my choice. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. Mr. Franklin sat silently across from me, watching my every reaction. I continued reading. Daniel is not my son. At least, not by blood. The words blurred in front of my eyes. My grip on the letter tightened. Your mother and I had a perfect life before she passed. But after her death, I lost myself. I made deals I shouldn't have made. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted. One of those people was Daniel's mother. What she told me later changed everything. I exhaled sharply, already dreading what was coming next. Daniel's real father was my business partner. A man I once called my closest friend. He betrayed me. And when he died, I was left with his son. I clenched my jaw. My father had raised Daniel like his own all these years, showering him with love and wealth while treating me, the only true heir, like a disappointment. But why? I kept reading. I was blackmailed. I was threatened. And now, even in my final days, I know that if I don't leave everything to Daniel, the people who are pulling the strings, they will make sure my mistakes ruin what's left of this family. They will come for you, Emily. That's why I had to do it. But you must fight back. The breath in my lungs felt heavy. I looked up at Mr. Franklin. Who was blackmailing him? He sighed. That's the part we don't know. But whatever it was, it forced your father to rewrite his will. And now, Daniel and his mother think they've won. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process everything. Daniel wasn't even my real brother. My father never wanted to disinherit me. And someone out there, someone powerful, had made sure I lost everything. Until now. I glanced back down at the will. I had the real inheritance. I had the truth. And now, I had a reason to fight. But if my father was right, someone wouldn't want me to. I sat in Mr. Franklin's office, my father's letter still clutched in my hands. My mind raced with everything I had just learned. Daniel wasn't my father's real son. The will my father left behind wasn't his true intention. And someone dangerous, had forced him to rewrite it. I had the truth now. But truth was dangerous. I looked up at Mr. Franklin. If this will is legally binding, does that mean I can take everything back? He nodded. Yes, but it won't be easy. The new will is already in effect, and Daniel and his mother will fight to keep what they have. You'll have to challenge it in court. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. A legal battle was one thing. But if my father had been blackmailed, this was about more than just money. Someone had been controlling him. And now, they would come for me. As if on cue, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A blocked number. I hesitated before answering. Hello. Silence. Then, a deep, disguised voice spoke. Walk away. My grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? A pause. You don't want to end up like your father. A chill ran down my spine. My father's death had been ruled a heart attack. But now, doubt crept in. I stood up, pacing the office. What do you mean? I demanded. Click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my pulse pounding. Mr. Franklin noticed my expression. What happened? I turned to him. Someone just threatened me. His face darkened. I was afraid of this. I clenched my jaw. You think my father's death wasn't natural, don't you? He hesitated, then sighed. Emily, your father was a careful man. But in the last few weeks before his death, he seemed scared. He came to me several times, asking about ways to protect his assets, asking if there was a way to hide money, change ownerships, move things without anyone noticing. I swallowed hard. My father had known something was coming. And now, it was coming for me. I took a deep breath. What's the next step? Mr. Franklin met my gaze. You have to decide if you're willing to fight this. I looked down at the will, my rightful inheritance. My father's final message to me. I thought of Daniel, sitting in my father's house, spending money that wasn't his. I thought of the people who had controlled my father, who had scared him into silence. Then I thought of the voice on the phone. Walk away. I clenched my fist. No. I wasn't walking away. I was going to uncover the truth. Even if it killed me. I left Mr. Franklin's office with a storm brewing inside me. The will was on my side, but the threats were real. Whoever had forced my father to rewrite it wasn't just going to let me take back what was mine. I drove through the city, my mind racing. My father had lived in fear before he died, and now I was starting to understand why. I pulled up to my apartment, parked the car, and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The words from the call still echoed in my head. You don't want to end up like your father. Had my father really died of a heart attack? Or had someone made sure he never had the chance to change the will back? I needed answers. And I knew exactly where to start. I hadn't stepped foot in my father's house since the will was announced. But as I pulled up the long driveway, I knew this wouldn't be a friendly visit. The mansion stood tall in the evening light, its windows glowing. Inside, Daniel was probably celebrating his victory, living in my home, spending my inheritance. I parked and walked to the front door. Before I could knock, the door swung open. Daniel stood there, a smug grin on his face. Well, he said, crossing his arms. Didn't think you'd have the guts to show up. I met his gaze, refusing to let him see any weakness. We need to talk. He leaned against the doorframe. Oh. Let me guess. You finally accepted that Dad was right. That I'm the one who deserves everything. I stepped closer. I know the truth, Daniel. For the first time, the smugness wavered. What the hell are you talking about? I smirked. I know you're not my father's son. His expression turned cold in an instant. His fingers tightened around the doorframe. Liar, he hissed. I pulled out my phone, opening a picture of the real will, the one that left everything to me. Dad didn't leave this to you. He was forced to change it. And I'm going to prove it. Daniel's face darkened, but before he could say another word, a voice interrupted us. Boys, let's not fight on the porch. I turned to see her, Monica Calloway, Daniel's mother. She stood in the doorway in an expensive silk dress, her eyes sharp as a knife. She gave me a knowing smile. Come inside, Emily. Let's talk. I knew walking in was a bad idea. But I also knew that if I wanted answers, I had no choice. I stepped inside. And that was my first mistake. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. Something was very, very wrong. The air was thick with tension. The grand chandelier overhead cast a golden glow across the marble floors, but the warmth was nothing more than an illusion. This house, my childhood home, no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the enemy. Behind me, Monica shut the door with a soft, deliberate click. The sound sent a chill down my spine. It felt less like a welcome and more like a lock turning. "Drink," she offered smoothly, gliding toward the bar in the living room. I ignored her. My eyes locked onto Daniel. "Who forced my father to change the will?" He scoffed. "You seriously think I know? He left everything to me because I deserved it." I took a step closer, my voice steady and sharp. "You're not his son." His jaw tensed. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but Monica's voice sliced through the room. "Enough, boys." I turned to her. "You know the truth, don't you?" She smiled, unbothered, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Truth is a matter of perspective, Emily." I held up my phone, showing her a picture of my father's real will, the one that left everything to me. "This isn't a perspective. It's legally binding." Monica took a slow sip of her wine, then set the glass down with a quiet clink. Her smirk never wavered. "Oh, Emily," she murmured. "Do you really think this is just about money?" A sharp chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. She stepped forward until she was just inches away, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your father owed people. Powerful people. And when he couldn't pay, he gave them something else instead." A pit formed in my stomach. "What?" She tilted her head, her expression almost sympathetic. "He gave them you." The word struck like a slap. I took a step back, shaking my head. "That's not possible." Monica sighed, swirling her wine lazily. "Your father was desperate, Emily. He made a deal. And when he tried to break it, well," she paused, her smile turning razor-sharp, "heart attacks can be so unpredictable." Ice filled my veins. "You're saying my father was murdered?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied me with quiet amusement, then took another sip of wine. "I'm saying your father didn't die of natural causes." She placed the glass down gently. "And if you're smart, you'll stop digging before you suffer the same fate." My hands curled into fists. "Who did he owe?" She sighed, as if she were bored with the conversation. "Wrong question, Emily. The real question is, what did they want with you?" A sickening dread settled in my chest. "You should leave," Daniel cut in sharply. "Before things get worse for you." Monica raised a brow. "Yes, that might be a good idea." I knew they wanted me gone. But walking away now meant letting them win. I straightened. "You think you can scare me off?" "I'm not my father." Monica's smirk deepened. "No," she murmured, leaning in close, "you're not." Then she whispered the words that sent my blood cold. "That's why you're still alive." I forced myself to keep my expression neutral, but my mind raced. They weren't just protecting their stolen fortune. They were hiding something far worse. And now, I was their biggest problem. I turned for the door, but Monica's voice followed me. "Oh, Emily," she purred. "It was over before you even walked in." I ignored her, pushing open the heavy front door. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but as I stepped outside, unease coiled around me. Something wasn't right. My car sat exactly where I had parked it, but as I got closer, my pulse kicked up. The driver's side door was slightly open. I hadn't left it like that. Every instinct screamed at me. Slowly, I reached for my phone, flicking on the flashlight. I aimed it toward the car, scanning the seats. Then I saw it. A cell phone on the passenger seat. It wasn't mine. I hesitated, then took a cautious step closer. The phone screen lit up. A message popped up. Unknown number. Still think you can win this? My breath caught in my throat. Then. Boom. The explosion ripped through the night. Flames roared into the sky as the shockwave sent me sprawling onto the pavement. My ears rang. My vision blurred. I gasped for breath, blinking hard to clear my head. My car was an inferno. If I'd gotten in a second sooner, I'd be dead. The thought sent ice through my veins. Someone had just tried to erase me. I forced myself up, ignoring the sharp sting in my palms as I grabbed my phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed. Mr. Franklin answered on the first ring. Emily. They just tried to kill me. My voice shook, but the rage underneath was solid. Silence. Then, his voice dropped. Listen carefully. You can't go home. You can't go anywhere they expect you to be. I scanned the empty street, my pulse hammering. Then where do I go? He hesitated. I'm sending you an address. Someone who might have the answers you need. Who? Your father's real friend. My stomach twisted. My father's supposed best friend had been a traitor, the man who raised his stolen son instead of me. But if my father had another friend, someone outside of all this, maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. A message popped up on my screen. The address. Be careful, Emily, Mr. Franklin said. Whoever is after you, they're not just protecting money. They're protecting something much bigger. The call ended. I took one last look at my burning car. This wasn't just a warning. This was an execution attempt. And I had just run out of time. I needed a car. Fast. The valet station 2 blocks away had plenty to choose from. I borrowed a sleek black sedan, ditching my phone SIM card before speeding off into the night. The address led me past the city limits, down forgotten roads swallowed by darkness. No streetlights. No traffic. Just isolation stretching for miles. I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt something else. Determination. They thought I was just another pawn, another loose end they could tie up. But I wasn't my father. And I wasn't going to let them win. The road ended at a rusted warehouse, its walls covered in faded graffiti. A single bulb flickered above the entrance. This was the place. I stepped out, every nerve on edge. The wind howled, the night impossibly still. Then, movement. A shadow shifted near the door. I tensed, ready. A man stepped into the dim light. Late 50s, leather jacket worn with time. His face was lined, but his eyes were sharp. Emily Calloway, he said, voice low. I kept my stance firm. Who are you? He took a slow drag from his cigarette before answering. Vincent Hale, he said. Your father's real best friend. Inside, the warehouse smelled of old wood and dust. Papers, stacks of cash, and whiskey bottles littered the back room. Vincent poured himself a drink but didn't offer me one. Your father told me this day would come, he said. I folded my arms. What day? He sighed. You think this is about money? About inheritance? He leaned forward. Your father was protecting something. And now that he's gone, you're next. A chill slithered down my spine. Protecting what? Vincent's jaw tightened. He pulled a black flash drive from a drawer and tossed it onto the table. This. I picked it up. It felt small. Insignificant. But whatever was on it had been worth my father's life. I met Vincent's gaze. What's on it? He swirled his drink. Proof. Proof of what? That your father wasn't just rich, he was powerful in ways you don't understand. And he made enemies. Big ones. I clenched my jaw. Who? Vincent smirked. The kind of people who make heart attacks look real. Who can erase your name from every bank, every record, every system. My pulse pounded. What do they want with me? His smirk faded. They don't just want you gone, kid. He exhaled. They want you to finish what your father started. I stared at the flash drive. If I opened it, there was no turning back. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was about power. I had two choices. Run. Disappear. Let them win. Fight. Dig deeper. Uncover the truth my father died for. I curled my fingers around the drive. I already knew my choice. And whoever was after me. They weren't ready for what was coming next.